The reason why I show this painting is because I love this painting so much. Now, this painting was spotted by me 20 years ago. I went into one of the Thai restaurants here in Singapore, by the way, and I'm not going to say the name of the restaurant because otherwise I'll be advertising for them. Yeah, anyway, it was very captivating because when I saw the Buddha statue and all the animals, and they were painting over shell, crab shell, yeah. And it was framed up on the wall. And I asked the owner, I said, can you give me a copy of the photograph? He did. He gave it to me. And I kept it in my computer. And everywhere I go, I like to show this. It's so calm and so serene, yeah, with the Buddha. Okay. All right. Now, I have to take out my reading glass. And this is symbolic of impermanence. If you know what I mean. Okay. Yeah. All right. Homage to Buddha, we did that. Now, the reason why I chose the word Dhamma in Australia instead of Buddhism in Australia is because Buddhism is not necessarily Dhamma. All right? And Dhamma is not Buddhism. Okay? And we can go deeper into it and talk about it. But what I wanted to emphasize here is when I talk about Dhamma, I'm talking about the true teaching of the Buddha and how in Australia Dhamma has been practiced. Okay? All right. Now, as you all know, Dhamma is the fastest, Buddhism is the fastest growing religion in Australia. There are about, according to the year 2008 census, there are about 500,000 Buddhists, 500,000 in a population of 21 million. So that is about 2.4%. It is the largest non-Christian religious grouping. As you all know, Australia is quite a plural society. It's a lot of migrants, a lot of different nationalities. Now, for those of you who do not know, there are as much as 140 different nationalities in Australia. And of course, they come with their own religious faith. And Buddhism is the largest non-Christian religious grouping in Australia. 80% of the Buddhists are Eastern Buddhists, which means Asian migrants. And the remaining 20% are Western Buddhists, which come from the Anglo-European population. All right? I am going to define what Eastern Buddhist and Western Buddhist means. Eastern Buddhists are mainly from Buddhist families who are ethnic migrants from Asia. Vietnam, Thai, Malaysians, Singaporeans, Taiwanese, Hongkies, all over. All right? Western Buddhists are generally Australian-born Caucasians and have probably left behind a Christian upbringing to embrace Buddhism when they became adults. Now, of course, there are a lot of migrants from Europe and from Eastern Europe, from even Middle East, and of course the other part of the West. But a lot of them are of Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-European background, and among them, they embrace Buddhism. And as you know, they grew up with a Christian background. Okay, so they are classified as Western Buddhists. Now you see some of the photographs, some practice Mahayana, some practice Theravada, some. Now, history of Buddhism in Australia, very quickly. About in the middle of 19th century, the gold rush. You heard about Australia being the new gold mine, so to speak, apart from the one in San Francisco, right, in America. During that time, a lot of people came to Australia because of the gold rush, and among them the Chinese in 19th century. But according to archaeological finding, perhaps the Chinese have set foot in Australia even earlier than this, in the 15th century, 400 years before the gold miners came. And that was during the time when Admiral Zheng He, who came down to the south, to Southeast Asia, and they said that perhaps the Chinese even came earlier. Anyway, the gold miners came because of the gold rush, and they brought along their traditional beliefs. which in those days were Confucianism, Taoism, and sort of mixed with Buddhism. All right, and you can see the photograph. One of the oldest so-called Buddhist temple, which actually a mixture of Taoism and all that, still stands in Bendigo in Melbourne. All right, in Victoria. Yeah. And then, of course, the next wave of people that brought Buddhism into Australia are the Japanese pearl diver. They settled in Western Australia, Darwin and Thursday Island. These are places out in the northern part of Australia, and they came with them, of course, their values and their beliefs. Yeah, and if you look at the photograph, some of the festivals are still celebrated even today in honor of the pearl divers. And there's a statue of the pearl diver. You see that on the one with the helmet, look like a spaceman. Yeah. And then there is even a monument in honor of 700 pearl divers who have died doing their work, in those days. Then, of course, the Sinanis, the Sri Lankans, were brought in by the British to work in sugarcane plantation, and they were responsible for bringing Theravadan Buddhism into Australia. Okay, and then about the end of Vietnam War, the Vietnamese refugees, another wave of migrants and refugees, brought along, Buddhism, basically Mahayanis, Vietnamese Mahayana. And there you see the picture of a Vietnamese temple in southern Australia. And in the late 60s, mid-60s to the mid-70s, the young people, the new age in the West, during the hippie time, remember, they were searching for alternate culture, and a lot of them traveled to India. All right, and then there was a much more a growing interest in theosophical, studies, and they formed theosophical societies. And Australians, of course, being from the Western world, are not immune from those influence. So a lot of them travel, just like the other people from the West, and they learn the Eastern philosophies, and along with it, Buddhism. Okay, and that is one other factor that brought Buddhism to Australia. And for very interesting, as early as 1925, the first Dhamma society, the first Dhamma study group was formed in Melbourne, and it's called the Little Circle of the Dhamma. The Little Circle of the Dhamma, but it didn't last. And and because of other trends and other movement, I think it died off. But anyway, it was a good start, And then with that, there were other study groups, Buddhist societies, and way back in the 1958, in the late 50s, the first Buddhist Federation of Australia was formed to coordinate the activities of the various Buddhist societies and the study group. Yeah, and then of course in the early 70s, the spread of Tibetan Buddhism to the West also has a significant impact in Australia, with Tibetan teachers being invited to Australia, and that is another wave of movement, Buddhist movement in Australia. Now, I just want to quickly categorize I call it the lines of transmission, the different groups of Buddhists, how they come about. Of course, the earliest and the most influential group are called ethnic Buddhism. Ethnic Buddhism arrived Australia with the migrants, right? So this was a natural process. The migrants came, they brought their traditions along, and they are called the ethnic Buddhists. Now, ethnic Buddhism is confined to the enclave of the ethnic groups, the Chinese, the Taiwanese, the Vietnamese, and so on and so forth, right? And they are more interested in preserving traditions and maintaining social framework of the ethnic groups. And of course, we did the cultural baggage, we call it, the cultural baggage. So you find that in those groups, almost exclusively are the ethnic migrants. For example, if you go to a Vietnamese temple, Buddhist temple, Vietnamese. You go to a Thai Buddhist temple, Thais. You go to a Sri Lankan Buddhist temple, exclusively Sri Lankan. So they're very ethnic based, all right? Please remember, I'm not saying anything wrong with them. I'm telling you the characteristic, of the formation of the different groupings in Australia and what sort of influence it has on the development of Buddhism in Australia. And then, of course, the other group is called, we call import Buddhism. Import Buddhism means local Australians interested in Buddhism went abroad to study and be trained under certain masters, came back to Australia, set up their own schools, societies, or viharas or temples. A very good example would be Ajahn Brahm, right? He went abroad and learned Buddhism, and then came to Australia, and of course his teacher Ajahn Chah assigned him to go to Australia and spread Dhamma. So this is an example of import Buddhism, all right? And then the other one is I must emphasize that in the case of import Buddhism, a lot of them are imported by the Anglo-European Australians, yeah? And of course, there are some Asians teachers who came over. The other group is called export Buddhism. Now, export Buddhism are big groups, established groups, from basically Taiwan, because China was then not opened up until the late 70s, 80s. But before that, Taiwan was the main base for export Buddhism. So there were different big established groups, yeah? And then they want to establish branches all over the world. So they come and establish branch temples in Australia. And they are very much controlled by the parent temples in their home country. All right? And one of the problems with export Buddhism is that they are very, very hierarchical, very, very centralized, and also very ethnically based. Yeah. So again, this is just to show you the landscape of Buddhism in Australia, all right, and what sort of influence it has on the later development of Buddhism in Australia. Mainstream Buddhist activities in Australia. Now, the Eastern Buddhists, the ethnic and the export Buddhist groups, confine themselves to duplicating activities and practices of their ethnic tradition. Even the architecture design of temples and viharas are replicas from their home countries. So if you go to Australia and you move around, you just by looking at the architecture design of the temple, you immediately can identify which group they come from. Oh, that is a Vietnamese one. That is a Thai one. That is a, that is a Taiwanese. There's a Chinese Mahayana. You can tell just from the architecture design. All right, because of the their focus on preserving their culture. Projects and activities that have significant impact on mainstream Australian society are mostly initiated and undertaken by the Western Buddhists. This is very interesting. Now, there are two reasons for it. One is language barrier. Most of the ethnic Buddhist groups, because of language barrier, they are not able to integrate themselves into the mainstream Australian society. So they cannot rub shoulders with the white Australians, all right? And they become enclave, And in that sense, even from the social standpoint, it's not very healthy. But we have to respect the fact that, that's what they are, all right? But the Western Buddhists are the one who actually bring Buddhism into the mainstream society of Australia. All right, let me give you a few examples. presentation of the Dhammapada to the Federal Parliament. This is very historical. For the first time in the history of Australia, a copy of the Dhammapada was presented to the Australian Federal Parliament. All right? And it says here that it has been added to the dispatch box. Now, if you wonder what a dispatch box is, all right? Now, you see the photograph here. The various representatives from the National Council of Australian Buddhists, or the Australian Council of Buddhists, they represented the Buddhist community and they presented the Dhammapada to the Federal Parliament. All right. Now, the dispatch box is actually a special box which is placed in front of the speaker's desk. And here the picture shows the dispatch box, and you see the Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd addressing the Parliament, putting his document on top of the dispatch box. Basically, the dispatch box is a symbol of truth, all right, telling the truth, yeah, and of course there's sacredness in it, you know. So a Dhammapada is actually given to the Federal Parliament and placed inside the dispatch box. And let me show you an abstract of the speech by the President of the Federation of Australian Buddhist Council during the presentation ceremony. Now, I want all of you just to read the green portion. And it says, in Buddhism, there is not one single text that we can point to and say that it is our Bible or Quran. The Lord Buddha taught many thousands of teachers or suttas. Some are short and some long. Some are thousands of verses in length and are bound in many volumes. However, there are some teachings of the Buddha that hold a special place in all the tradition, and the text is the Dhammapada. This is the book that we present to you today. We are not aware of any Buddhist followers in the Federal Parliament, because during that time there were no known member of Parliament that were Buddhists. All right. However, in the event of a Buddhist being elected, whatever the party or politics they represent, this book will be ready to guide them as they take their oath of service. So the Dhammapada is like the Bible, you know. Yeah, they take the oath of office. Okay, very, very significant move for the Buddhist community. What does it mean? It means a recognition, you know, of the presence of Buddhism in Australia. And the Western Buddhists did it, you know. And the ethnic Buddhists have been in Australia for the last 40, 50 years. Nothing of that sort of things were being done. But the Western Buddhists took the initiative. Okay. Australian Sangha Association. This is something that we will be very proud of because of our association with our spiritual patron, Ajahn Brahm. He was instrumental and pioneer for establishing the Australian Sangha Association. Buddhism had been in Australia for 50 years or more. Right? No attempt was made to unify the Sangha. Ajahn Brahm and the fellow brother monks, Ajahn Sujato and all the other people, they got together and they initiated the Australian Sangha Association. Now, I want to bring your attention to the verses from the Dhammapada below. Right? Happy the Buddha's arising. Happy the true Dhamma's teaching. Happy the Sangha in concord. In concord, their striving is happy. Wonderful, isn't it? Wonderful. All right. Despite of the various different traditions, different schools, an attempt is made to unify the Sangha. So what does it mean? It means that there is a national voice for the Buddhists in Australia, despite the fact that they are only 2.4%. And in a Christian country, remember that, in a Christian country, they have a national voice. Okay? That brings about courageous reforms in Australia. I'm sure you all read about that, the episode about, you know, the female ordination in Australia, the bikini ordination, and how Ajahn Brahm has to go through tremendous pressure, yeah, and this is one of them, reforms, huh? And the despite of the fact that the Buddha recognized the fourfold assembly, the existence of bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, all right, yet there's so much resistance, to the effort to revive the bhikkhuni ordination in the Theravada tradition. In fact, the first bhikkhuni ordination in Australia started with the Tibetan group. There was one Tibetan group, same problem they face. Every time they have a female devotee who wants to be ordained, they have to send her to Taiwan and be ordained under the Chinese Mahayana lineage. All right, because it's the same, just like the other resistance that the Theravadan school faces, the Tibetan school also faces the same problem. So someone took the courage to break that tradition and started the first bhikkhuni ordination in Australia. So Australia seemed to be, the example, fine example for reforms. And then, of course, the first bhikkhuni ordination was done in Western Australia. And the 4 venerables that were ordained. You see the pictures there? Yeah? Okay. This is another very proud event, another proud happenings for the Buddhist community. Ajahn Brahm was invited to meet the Queen. Queen Elizabeth came to Australia in 2006 because of the Commonwealth Game, and the Australian Parliament, of course, hosted a state dinner. In those days, you never expect anybody from the Buddhist world to be invited. But because of the formation of the Australian Sangha Association, and Ajahn Brahm was its first president, he was invited to meet the Queen and to have dinner with the Queen, all right, to dine with the Queen. And I want to share with you because, as you all know, Ajahn Brahm is very, very humorous and he likes jokes, And this is one of the jokes he dish out, when he talked to the groups. The invitation card included a dress code, a black tie, military uniform, or long dress. I figured my robes qualified for long dress. So this is a good thing of becoming a monk, You don't have to worry about dress code, right? Even state dinner you are invited, you qualify, long dress. So I went and saw Queen Elizabeth as well as Prince Andrew. I noticed he's getting bored, so I said to him, if you lose any more hair, you can become a monk. And the prince laughed, yeah? So what Ajahn Brahm is trying to say is that people like humor, yeah? And humor makes us, all right. Another example of mainstream involvement is the Black Saturday. I don't know whether you read in the news. There was this big bushfire in Victoria, and it was a disaster. 173 people were killed, and 2,000 homes were destroyed. And there was a national mourning, a national day of mourning. And because of the Western Buddhists being able to rise to the occasion, to be in the mainstream society of Australia, they were invited to participate in the National Day of Mourning. And Venerable Chi Kwan, she's from the Korean Zen tradition, I think, and she represented the Australian community at the Day of Mourning. And it was a very touching. In fact, the local newspaper reported, the media reported very widely that the Buddhist speech was the most touching part. Yeah, because it talks about compassion and impermanence and all that, which is very good. Yeah. Now, the other thing why the Western Buddhists were very successful in bringing Buddhism into the mainstream society is because of the ability to harness the use of technology, all right, the media. And of course, the media people are very interested, to cover those news. So this is another factor. Another example of some, major events in the mainstream society. United Nations Day of Vesak is celebrated every year in Australia, and the Buddhist community, of course, is being always represented. and I wanted to share with you the fact that despite there are only 500,000 Buddhists in Australia, there are so many organizations. The Federation of Australian Buddhist Council, which is a council that, just like our Singapore Buddhist Federation, but this one has its umbrella organizations as like the Buddhist Council of New South Wales, Buddhist Council of Victoria, Buddhist Council of Queensland, Buddhist Council of South Australia, and Buddhist Council of Western Australia. So they're very active. And then, of course, the ability to host world events. Now, this only comes about when you have that leadership, organizing, and the infrastructure and the professionalism to be able to organize such events. And I think the Western Buddhists in Australia have that capability, and that's the reason why they were able to host. Even the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, comes to Australia quite often, and big events being held there. And you need the expertise to be able to do that, and of course the leadership, All right. Some major Buddhist events that's coming up this year. There's going to be a Buddhist festival month, Buddhist film festival. There's going to be an ecological history of Buddhism exhibition. So there are many activities going on, which is mainstream, by the way. It's covered very widely by the media. And then there's a special school days. You'll be surprised, how they got involved, the schools. Because there are schools that are students who do Buddhist studies. And then they need support and help in their studies. So they start a school day where they can come and consult the practicing Buddhists, or the venerables for the questions they have about Buddhism. Yeah. Buddhist studies in Australian schools. Yeah. Something that you will be quite surprised, in a Christian country, sort of. Of course, Australia is a secular country. It doesn't. The state and the church is separated. But despite of the fact that it is a secular country, predominantly the population is Christians. So in a Christian country, we still have Buddhist studies in Australian schools. From kindergarten to year 12, students are free if they want to study Buddhism. All right, and they have a subject from kindergarten to primary 6 known as Human Society and Its Environment. And in that subject, there is a topic known as People and Their Beliefs. And because of that, Buddhism is covered. And when I was, in those days when I was a volunteer at the Fo Guang Shan Temple in the Wollongong, I was responsible for training the tour guides and volunteer to guide school groups, who comes. And you got all these primary school kids, they come in bus loads, hundreds of them. And then they tour the temple, and then you have to explain to them what is this, what is that, why is that statue have 1,000 arms, that sort of thing. And they ask very, very smart questions. Very interesting, and because of that, they got excursion. All right. So what I want to share with you is the fact that the Australian schools, do pay emphasis in Buddhism. From kindergarten to year 12, you got different stages, from the study of people and their belief to the study of religion, and then even HSC, a elective subject where they can specialize in Buddhism, and even in some schools, they do not have such programs. If the parents feel that there is a need for the children to go through religious studies, they can make a request. And then the schools will form classes. And then the volunteers will come from the various approved Buddhist organizations. And these teachers, of course, trained by the Buddhist Council, And then they are certified, and then they are sent as volunteers to teach Buddhism in those schools, special classes. They call it special religious education. 2 hours, 1 hour a week. 1 hour a week, sort of. All right, the other thing that I wanted to share with all of you is the social engagement. And when you go through all this, you'll find that the type of social engagement the Western Buddhists undertook in Australia is quite different from the one that we see, here, right? Buddhist chaplaincy, prison, schools, universities, hospitals. They are very big into counseling and psychotherapy. Mental health is a big issue in Australia. The stress of modern living. So stress management is a very favorite subject. And because, Buddhism, because of this training, mind training in tranquility, in calmness, in inner peace, it becomes a favorite. Almost every counseling or psychotherapy organization would like to have something to do with Buddhism, right? So in that sense, it's very big. And mental health, I said, I was invited on one occasion to give a talk during the Mental Health Week on mindfulness. What is mindfulness? How it helps in the daily life. So this is something very, very good for the Western Buddhists. All right, Buddhist tertiary education. There are efforts being made to support further education in Buddhism in universities. And an example would be the University Buddhist Education Foundation, which is a not-for-profit trust established in year 2000, and they support courses run by University of Sydney. Postgraduate studies in Masters of Buddhist Studies, Graduate Diploma in Buddhist Studies, Graduate Certificate in Buddhist Studies. Now, the reason why I'm showing all this example is because I want to later on being able to convince you and persuade you the reforms that has been taking place in Buddhist fellowship under Sister Angie's leadership is in the same direction, right? Education, social engagement, all these are very important, and I explain to you why, all right? Now, again, the Australian Association of Buddhist Studies aims to promote the academic studies of Buddhism, a special professional body to invite renowned speakers, renowned scholars, to come and talk about Buddhism. Almost in all major universities in Australia, there is a Buddhist society. I just recently revived the University of Wollongong Buddhist Society. It was started in 2006, and then after 3-4 years, because of the turnover of students, it died down. And just before I left, I told the committee to revive it, and I try to help them financially if I can, and also help them with my link with the various Dhamma teachers so that they can invite them to go to the University of Wollongong and give talks. So it's very active, and I want to mention that there's this network called Mitra. Mitra, as you know, is a Pali term for virtuous friends. And surprisingly, the Buddhist societies of the various universities were able to come together and work as a unified team, despite of the different spiritual advisor who came from different traditions. And I think the problem that we have in Singapore, which I have been always complaining about, is up to today, there is still no national, or rather a unified body to represent the Buddhist societies of the various tertiary education. The NUS, the NTI, the NTU, and the various polytechnics, they have Buddhist societies, but they never able to come together. And I think it's because of, again, the different traditions. And the people are not encouraging them to work together. And I hope maybe one day the BF youth group can pioneer something like this. All right? Okay. Concerns and challenges of Australian Buddhists. And this is where we're going to start learning the lesson from the experience of the Australian Buddhists. Western Buddhists, the Anglo-European, they yearn for reforms in the teaching and practice of the Dhamma to shed ethnicity, because they cannot identify themselves with the ethnic practices of the ethnic Buddhists. You ask them to go and put on these robes, these gowns, in the Mahayana practice, because I had the experience of taking a group, and they complained, it was summer, it was so damn hot, and yet they have to put on the gown, yeah, and they sit and to go for meditation. They say, look, this is madness, you know. Why can't we have T-shirts, you know? Something like this, all right? And the baggage of lineage tradition, yeah, and this is quite a problem. Again, I must emphasize, I'm not saying anything wrong with them. What I'm saying is that, given the circumstances of the society and the type of Buddhists we are trying to bring about, you know, trying to help, we have to take into account some of the resistance. Yeah? They strive to integrate the practice into mainstream Australian values. This is necessary so that future generations of Anglo-European Australians, their children and their children's children, are able to identify the teaching and practice of the Buddha Dhamma with Australian values and their worldview, and make choices to embrace them. Otherwise, when these parents, being Buddhists, pass on, the children will not necessarily follow, you know, their footsteps, you know. So, what about Eastern Buddhists in Australia? They have similar concerns, because after the third generation, fourth generation, the Australian-born Asians, Australian-born Chinese, Australian-born Thais or Sri Lankans, if they are not making changes to their practices in those ethnic Buddhist groups, the children are not able to identify with them. They stop following their parents to the temples. They question the practices there. All right? And then, because they are more educated, Western educated, more globalized because they travel, all right, and they're exposed to the world, they question the values, they question the meaning of the practices. Then what happens? They shy away. And then after the third generation, gone. So this is also their concern. So now, people are very conscious, but the Western Buddhists are taking the lead, yeah, trying to evolve, if I, short of a better word, Australian Buddhism. Yeah? Not sectarian, whatever temperament you have, you can practice, you know. Take away the cultural baggage. What can we learn from the Australian experience? The courage to reform and revitalize. Very, very key and very important. Yeah? Do not be held back by the traditions. You know, so long. Let me draw this example. Analogy of the cup and tea. Yeah, the tea is the Dhamma. The cup is the culture. Now you cannot do without culture, because if there's no culture, you can't convey the teaching. So there must be some culture, but the main thing is the tea. All right. So if you want to drink the cup of tea, you have to make sure that the cup is suitable for the person, you know, who wants to drink the tea. So you can change a cup without changing the tea. So the reform, when we talk about reform, people are very scared. People are saying that, you know, you are coming with false teachings. You know, you are going to come up with your own schools, your own, you know, lineages and all that. No, preserve the core teaching of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the true Dhamma, but package it differently, so that the younger generations, because of the different exposure, different upbringing, are able to identify, are able to see themselves fitting in, you know. Otherwise, it will be a problem. Ethnicity is key obstacles to reform. It is. Look at what happens to the bhikkhuni ordination, you know, right, in Western Australia. Uproar in Thailand, yeah, because of the lineage. Because of being stuck, you know, to the tradition. So it creates a problem. It is a big obstacles to reform. Focus on the universalistic character of the Dhamma and shed the cultural element of rituals and devotional practice. Rituals, devotional practice are necessary for some people, but you have to look at the temperament of the new generations. You know, we have to fine-tune, you know, and adapt our practices, you know, to suit, you know, their emotional needs. Yeah, it's very important. Dhamma education in the living language is very important. Dhamma education in the living language. Yeah, nothing mystical, nothing, what I call high up there, You have to put the message with the 2 feet on the ground. Talk in terms of everyday life. Talk in terms of their living language, all right? Mainstream social engagement. I think BF is doing a very good job here in terms of making their stand clear when there is an issue concerning the Buddhist community, and your voice must be heard, and you got to have the courage to stand up and say, look, this is how we feel about things, Yeah, and it's very important to really be engaged, yeah, and not to I think for the sake of harmony, we keep quiet. Politically right, yeah, to be politically right sometimes is not good for Dhamma, all right. A living practice with living benefits. A living practice with living benefit. Spirituality cannot be separated from life. You cannot believe in some values, all right, in your spirituality, and then you lead a separate life altogether. It's not possible. It is very conflicting. It eats into your conscience. So, a living practice with living benefits. Yeah. It is not merely texts and ideas that Westerners are looking for. I'm talking about in terms of Australia, yeah, and not merely the Buddhism of the books, but persons who display the truth of the teaching in their life. Thus, when we consider how to establish Buddhism in the West, we should not think merely of the pure canonical Dhamma, but of a living transmission, yeah, by examples of the teachers, by examples of the practitioner, yeah, and I think this comes stronger, much stronger, in getting the attention of people to have faith in your practice or in your religion. The viharas established in the West should be in the mainstream of Buddhism, not replicas of ethnic temples imported from the East. Yeah? If ever we're going to have our own building, take that into consideration. Okay? Yeah, important. Stripping off ethnicity and cultural trappings, examining the original teaching, and study the root motivation of the Buddha, the naked Buddha. Yeah, the naked Buddha. Strip off its cultural baggage, all the trappings. In fact, even among the Mahayanis, there is a school, very strong school now, growing, which are advocating that they go back and study the original teaching of the Buddha, which is the Agamas, or the Nikayas, right? Which is from the Theravadan school. And they are saying that after you study all that, you become to be more discerning about some of the Mahayana practices or Mahayana suttas. And then they will be able to say, well, these are actually not so much what the Buddha said or what the Buddha taught, but they are part of the 4 siddhantas, or the skillful means, the cultural expression, if you will, of the Chinese Mahayanas. Not necessarily means what the Buddha say, which I think is very important, and I have the opportunity to be able to be associated with some of these people, and I'm helping them also. And in fact, I just spoke with Brother Piyatan, to help me with some materials, so that they can also study, the Nikayas, the early teaching of the Buddha, because in the Mahayana schools, very few things in English from the Theravada schools. Even the Mahayana teaching itself, a lot of them are in Chinese. Yeah? So that's it. So much for your attention. Now I just want to end by saying that you are very blessed, to have an organization like the Buddhist Fellowship, and we are very fortunate to have courageous reformers like Sister Angie. I know she sometimes has to go through very difficult time, pushing through changes and reforms, and come up with innovations. new ideas. We call them groundbreaking projects. Yeah, in those days we used to call groundbreaking, the ground shock. Yeah, groundbreaking, and it sometimes rock the boat. Yeah, but these are necessary. If you do not change, if you do not reform, be very frank with yourself. All right, put your palms on your heart and ask this question: would your children's children, your children and your children's children, continue to benefit from the teaching of the Buddha, which have benefited you so much? If what you see around us as Buddhism, not Dhamma, do not change. Very scary. Very, very scary. All right. Now, please, I'm not saying that other practices are not correct. I'm not saying that other practices are not Buddhistic, not Dhamma. No. What I'm saying is, time has changed. My father, my mother could not study the Dhamma. The only way I could teach them is Chan Ami Tofo. Right? But when it comes to my children, even today, my children don't follow my way of practicing the Dhamma. They have their own ways. So you see, this is a very important question that we must ask ourselves. Very crucial. All right? So with that, I thank you very much for your attention. May all of you be well and happy always. Thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay. Now, any questions? Now you open to the field. Yeah.
Brother, thank you for your talk. Just out of curiosity, so how do your children practice the Dharma now?
I have 2 daughters and a son. The elder daughter is 36, youngest son is 28. Yeah, they are all educated overseas, so they are all exposed, to the Western values and all that. They practice Dhamma by their daily livings. Yeah, they do not. They would go to the temple on special occasions. They are not devotional at all. In other words, they have a Buddha statue at home. They put flowers. They offer flowers and all that. But they don't do chanting and all that. Yeah, but they are very conscious in their daily life practices. Like for example, even with their occupation, they try to choose occupation that right livelihood. As far as two of my 3 children are nurses, so right livelihood. One is an ICU nurse. The other one is the boy is a nurse in the operating theater. And he comes back home one day and said, "Daddy, after working for so many years in the operating theater, I come to one conclusion: it doesn't matter who you are, you end up in the same bed. You get cut up the same way." And that's Dhamma, So, yeah. So yeah, they are more towards that. Yeah, and they are not devotional in that sense that they go to temple regularly and all that. Yeah, but they do have the values, the Buddhist values in mind. Yeah, and of course they call themselves Buddhists. Yeah. Any other questions?
Brother Teck Suan, since you've been away 11 years and you could see things in a very objective manner, how do you see, or what would you like to see Buddhist fellowship moving into or transforming further, in your opinion?
I think Buddhist fellowship will continue to spearhead a lot of the reforms that is required in the Buddhist community by setting examples. Yeah, because if you do something, people will follow. Yeah, I quote a very real life example. Some 30 years back, 30, 40 years back, you couldn't find a single choir among the Buddhist group. Choir, group singing. None. The first one that was set up here was by a Taiwanese group, the Fo Guang Shan Influence. Yeah? And then all of a sudden they find that, choir is something good, people like it. And then all the Buddhist temples start their own choirs. Yeah. So the same thing, I think Buddhist fellowship would be doing the Buddhist community a great favor by spearheading, by setting examples, be exemplary of some of the reforms. And I think Buddhist fellowship will be the core. I would like to see this continuing, which is already now, but I'd like to see it continuing to be the coordinating organization that brings the English educated group together. Because if you look at this Singapore, the English educated, if they want to study Buddhism, they find themselves quite lost sometimes. Yeah, and of course you can argue that there are several other ethnic groups, that be Tibetan or Sri Lankans or whatever, but you can't have a group like this, where you're free, to practice whatever traditions you want, but still be able to, receive the teaching of the Buddha in a proper way. So I think this is going to be, I think, the core task of Buddhist fellowship, be the leading organization for English-speaking Buddhists in Singapore. The other thing I would, to answer Sister Angie's question, is to continue to be a voice to be heard in Singapore on behalf of the Buddhist community. Yeah, some issues, be it national issues, be it issues concerning the Buddhist community, I think the Buddhists must come out and express themselves. And I think you need this sort of leadership to be able to come out and be known. And of course, it takes professionalism, it takes, courage, and also the support of everybody to be able to accomplish all that, And the other thing is also to be mindful of the fact that there are technologies out there that can be harnessed to help in the teaching of the Dhamma. Like, for example, the Brahm Education Center, what is being put forward in terms of courses and all that is a very good example, of the need to push forward education, to allow the English educated to have opportunity to go for formal Buddhist education, right? Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, we would like to present a small token appreciation for Brother Low for helping to set up this. Yeah, thank you. From Sister Angie. Okay, for all the good work that he had done and all the groundbreaking things that he had done for BF. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Yes, so thank you for mentioning about the choir and everything.